We're reading the whole Bible this year. Today is day 84. We are reading Joshua 9 through 11. Now, chapter 9 talks about the Gibeonite deception. See, Israel's supposed to be going through and taking out all of their enemies before them and not making treaties with anybody. The Gibeonites hear about this, figure it out, and so they decide to jump in and try some deception. They dress in raggedy clothes, they have moldy food and cracked wineskins, and everything looks old and tore up, and they go in a caravan that looks beat up, and they arrive at Israel, and they say, Look, we're from a faraway land, and we came out here because we heard of the fame and wonder of your God, and so we want a treaty with you. And it says right here that in verse 14, the Israelites sampled their provisions to see that all their stuff really was old and worn out, but did not inquire of the Lord. Then Joshua made a treaty of peace with them to let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratified it by oath. So then they're stuck. They've made a confession and agreement before the Lord, but they did not check with the Lord. They did not have a word from the Lord telling them that it was okay to make a treaty with these people, and they messed up. They find out that it was all a lie. They find out they're actually their neighbors and they should be a people that they're taking out. And they say, well, we can't do that because we promised before the Lord that we would not. We can't go back on that oath. So now we're stuck with, let's make them servants. And so they say, we'll make them woodcutters and water carriers. And so they agree to that, and they bring them in as basically servants. Now, chapter 10 is pretty intense. Israel goes to war on behalf of Gibeon because 5 kings get together and go, hey, Gibeon partnered with Israel. Let's go take them out. And so they all march up against. Gibeon calls Israel to arms, and they go into war. And the Lord says to Joshua in verse 8, do not be afraid of them. I've given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you. And so they all march and they get all the way there. And as they begin to fight them, and the Lord sends hail, and really just they're destroying these armies. And then Joshua stands up and says to the Lord in the presence of Israel, this is verse 12, sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Aijalon. Verse 13, so the sun stood still. The sun stood still, and the moon stopped until the nation avenged itself on its enemies, as it is written in the book of Jashar. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day, so an extra 24 hours. There's never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. And I gotta say, like, that right there tells us this is not meant to be a regular occurrence. You don't just shout out whatever crazy random nonsense and the Lord just has to listen to you because you declared it in his name. And so there's right here in the text, it kind of tells us it's not about name it and claim it, declare whatever you want, but the Lord had already promised that he was going to give them over, and Joshua steps up and says, this is what we need to make this happen. As we fulfill your word, Lord, this is what's required of us. And the Lord does it. The Lord follows through, moves heaven and earth literally to hold the sun still over there so that they have daylight to, this one day to take care and rout their enemies. Israel pursues the 5 kings all the way until they end up hiding in armored cities, and Joshua demands that they be released, and so they bring them out. He has his general stands with their feet on their necks. He says, and he quotes from the beginning of what the Lord had promised in the beginning of the book of Joshua before they go over the river, and then again once they cross the river. He says, do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, be strong and courageous. This is what the Lord will do to all the enemies you are going to fight. And then he kills them, he puts their bodies up on poles, and he puts them on display, and then when night hits, they throw them in a cave that they were hiding in and pack it up with stones. And it says those stones are still there to this day, yet another memorial of the deliverance and might of God, so that when they walk by that spot, they go, that's where we took care of these armies that stood against us. The rest of chapter 10 into chapter 11 talks about heading first south and then all the way north and taking out every king. And it says over and over that they did everything the way the Lord commanded. He did everything as the Lord told him to do, as the Lord had commanded Moses. Moses commanded Joshua, and Joshua led the people of Israel to do it. And it says at the end of chapter 11, so Joshua took the entire land just as the Lord had directed Moses, and he gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal divisions. Then the land had rest from war. And so here Israel has begun and established properly the conquest of the land of Canaan. And we'll see some issues later on. But for right now, they have remembered that the Lord is with them. They've remembered to be strong and courageous. They have fully gone in and done what the Lord said and taken out their enemies, with the exception of the Gibeonites. And that moment right there, the biggest thing that stands out to me, even more than, hey, sun, stand still, like, forget that. Don't try to pray for the sun to stand still. That's not going to happen. That's not what the Lord intends there. But as we do whatever it is the Lord calls us to do, as we do whatever is before us, we should seek the Lord. And that's what stands out to me is the one thing where they go wrong in this entire endeavor is the Gibeonites come and they look scrungy and everything else. And Joshua does not inquire of the Lord. It was that simple. Just turn and ask, Lord, what should we do? But instead, they just jump right into a treaty and say, yeah, this works for us, when we'll swear before the Lord, but they don't inquire of the Lord. And he's already said, don't make foolish oaths. Don't promise stuff you can't live up to. You're going to have to live up to these things. Just inquire of the Lord. And I think for us, it's so easy to say like, oh yeah, that sounds like it's fine, even when it kind of brushes right up against something that we maybe shouldn't be doing. And sometimes even if it is more or less morally neutral, it may not be the thing the Lord has for us. And I would hate to miss out on something that God has for me because I locked myself into something else by oath or promise or commitment, and be stuck doing that when the Lord had this other thing for me. It's not that much harder to just seek and wait on the Lord and listen for his voice and follow where he leads. So that's what God's speaking to me as I read through this. What about you? What's speaking to you? What questions do you have? Let's talk about those things. Let's keep reading, and we'll see you next time, and we'll see you in the chats. Be rad for Jesus.